Hi, welcome to another episode of Android Programming. Let's take a peek back to the Android locations using Google Places API with geofencing. That's using the Google Places map UI to select a particular location and set the geofence to the location selected. I will gonna extend more with this source, and we're going to actually make the notification of when the user enters the geofence or exits the geofence visible at the point of entry and at the point of exit. We are not actually going to be relying on the geofence broadcast receiver to do that for us. We're going to be using the intent service to actually trigger a notification anytime the user enters the geofence or the device enters the geofence and exit the geofence. So I'll actually be at the Street 200 Studio, and you could actually get the source code from the GitHub, and the video is actually showing right there to you if you've not watched this for the first time. I will employ you to do that, and at the same time I'll still be going through step-by-steps on how to achieve this integration. Right there in Android Studio, I will implore you to upgrade your Google Play services, the Google Play Services Places, the Google Play Services Maps, the Google Play Services itself, and the services location. You need to upgrade so as to take advantage of the data clients that we're going to be using to map the ID of a particular location and extract the address or extract the title or the name of the location. So after doing this, you sync Gradle and get your application set and ready. Straight down to the layout file, we have the activity main, which is actually the launcher. You're going to see the settings to actually set up your geofence, set up the location APIs and permission rather, and at the same time you're going to have a recycler view that's going to list out all added location which you've set geofence to. So you're going to have the UI like this, the enable geofences, the location permission, the ringer permissions, but you might take that out from now since you're going to be using a well laid out structured notification. And you have the add new location button and the location recycler view, which is actually going to list out the locations you've added, as I've said earlier. So cool, that's the structure of this layout. The item card is going to be the items that you will be listed with the recycler view. We have the name, that's the name, the address, or the name of the location added, and the address of the location. You could add some other metadata which you extract from the Google Places API. Cool. After this, we could extract to the Java classes that we used. We actually use the SQLite database to save locations anytime they're added. So that's the reason why you need to have a package. Sometimes you call this package data, or you could call the provider, where you have the contract to specify the columns used, the DB helper to actually create a table, and the content provider, which is going to help you to solve or to query the SQLite database. Looking at the contract, we have the authority and the base content URI, the path to the table called places, and an inner class called place entry that implements the base column. That's where you're going to set up the table name and the column you needed. We only specify a column called the column place ID, just the place ID. You need just an ID of the location added. That's all. In the DB helper, this extends the SQLite open helper, where you specify your database name, the database version, and you're going to trigger the onCreate method to create the table, which you have right there, creating the table where the column needed. That's a column, a place entry ID, that's going to be an auto increment ID. That's different from the place ID. The place ID is unique to that particular place. That's why you have it as a unique keyword there, and you have it. And on conflict replace, so you replace if you're trying to add up the same location. It's actually going to replace that. You're not going to replicate locations since they are of the same coordinates. That's the essence of that. Cool. The content provider, it's actually going to help us to solve the database. It extends the content provider where you have the places of all places and the places with an ID. That's a specific place. The build URL matcher will help you to point down to which path are you following. Are you trying to extract all places or a place with an ID? That's why you have it specified this way. And in the onCreate, you can get to initialize the fields needed. Majorly, when you're trying to access the place DB helper, you try to instantiate that right there, and you override a couple of methods: the insert, the update, the query, and the delete. In the insert, that's where you get to insert to the database, calling the DB insert to the table name with the values, the content values you get. You insert that, and you trigger the notify the resolver if the URI has been changed, so that it's actually going to return the newly inserted URI. Cool, and you return the URI. You have the query when you're trying to call all values or all data from a particular table name. You have it specified this way, where you have different attributes: the projection, the selection, its arguments, and the sort order. So you have it specified right there. And you have the onDelete method. And the deletes when you're trying to actually delete a particular data from the SQLite database. You can extend more on this. Probably on swipe of the recycle list, it's going to delete the particular location, and at the same time it's going to remove Geofence on that location. So that's something we can still add up later on. But for this purpose, we're going to actually focus on the notification which we're going to have in the main activity, which is the launcher. Let's get to understand the flow of this application. If you might have forgotten, I will remind you. There is a new way to actually use the Google API client. I will implore you to check online. That's a new way which it's actually for the latest versions, and all other implementations are still working, so that doesn't change. We are going to implement the connection callback and on connection field listener. Get to understand this, where you're going to override some methods to be able to help that work. And we have some member variables here: the place adapter, the recycler view, the Google API client, and the geofencing. Cool. That's a class which we have. We're going to talk about that, where we're going to update, trigger the geofence, cancel out the geofence, and do some other things. In the onCreate method, you initialize the fields, you instantiate those classes you need to do, most especially the place list adapter, which is going to bind the data to the view. And we have the switch, which are all the effects we had right there in the layout. The switch for the geofence, once you trigger the geofence on or off, the switch toggle. We have also for the location, once you check the location, so we have it right there. This for the enable switch, which is for the geofence, and you're going to actually set that to the preferences, and on off. Once it's checked, once it's not enabled, you have this setup set on check change listener to the switch, and once there's a listener to it, it's going to actually check if it's checked or not. If it's checked, that means you actually wanted geofencing, and if it's not going to. Once it's checked, it's going to ask for a permission, because you're going to have this done. You have this to work on the runtime, and it's actually very okay with latest versions of Android, down to even the Oreo, where you actually going to run permission while using the application, not at the beginning. So on check change, it's going to actually check if it's checked or not. If it's checked, it's going to trigger the register all geofencing, but if it's not, it's going to unregister, as you've seen. So we get to look at that in the geofencing class, because this is actually an object, or let's say yes, trying to assess the method right there in the geofencing. We'll get to look at that later on. And now you need to build up the location services API client, whereby you're going to use the add API method to request the location services API. You had the connection callback, you had on connection field listener. This is where you call the location services API, and the geodata API from the places. We're actually going to be using another tweak right there in the Geofence Transition intent service to replace. This replaces the geodata API. You instantiate the geofencing class. We have this class right there. It's actually doing a lot. It's going to register all geofencing. It's going to unregister all geofencing. Those are the two functions that the class is going to be doing, and we're going to look at that later on. And we have on connection field and on connection suspended. All those are overridden. Cool. Refresh places data. What are you doing? You are refreshing the places that you're trying to swap, trying to get the values from the content URI, like using the content provider to query the SQLite database and return that value. And at that point in time, you're going to return an ID. So it's an ID you're getting back, which is what you are getting over here, the column place ID. And this is what you're going to actually use to get the place buffer. You get the place buffer of the ID. That's, you want to get the places of the ID. That's what latitude and longitude does the ID belong to? What is the address of that ID? What is the name of the location that the ID is? A lot of attributes can be extracted based on the ID. That's why you're needing the geodata API at this point. You also need it in the transition when you're trying to translate an ID to a name, so that you just don't have a bunch of numbers as a notification. Now, before you could even refresh or place or extract data from the SQLite database, you must have actually insert into it. So we'll likely look at that first, and this is where you get to look at that when you're going to call the place picker activity, which is going to return back with a selected place, and it's going to actually take three parameters: the request code to pass when calling the start activity for results, the results code, and the data, the intent that carries the result data. So those are three parameters you're expecting on activity result. That's after you select the location from the UI interface, which is actually populated out of the box for you. Now you call on the place, cool, with the data that you're getting from the intent. So you have a bunch of data as a place object. Now you extract the place information from the API. You might need to extract the name, the address, but you actually going to need the ID. Very important. So we're only extracting the ID since that's the only column we set aside. Now you call the content values to insert into that column for you. That's very straightforward. Calling the column and the value you're inserting, and you trigger the get content resolver to insert into this column using the content URI and the content values that you're actually putting into it. At that point in time, that's when you could now refresh places data to get the live data information. So that's when it's going to actually populate to the adapter, swap to the adapter with values, gets that binded to the recycler view, and it's going to display right there in the main activity. That's the activity main XML, where we have the recycler view. And on resume, you need to initialize the location permission checkbox to check if it's checked or not. That's if it's not checked, definitely you won't be able to access the locations API. But if it's checked, that's the permission. You need to accept the permission, and that is actually going to get you started up. And you have that on location permission checked to actually check if you have the permission access find location, and if you don't have, it's going to request that permission for you. That's just what that's doing. Now let's get to look at the Geofence, where you are going to actually set up to register all geofencing, to update geofencing list, and to even remove geofencing. Now to register all geofencing method, which was called in the main activity. This implements the results callback. This class geofencing implements the result callback, and this is where you get to set the geofence radius. And most times you set kind of let's this up to this is 1,606 meters. So it's actually going to cover the jurisdiction you're actually looking at, and the timeout that's of 24 hours, so that it's not going to drain you the battery. So that should be a timeout for your geofence. And the Geofence list, because you might be adding some lists. Probably you've added over 2-3 places. That's going to form a list for you. It's more than one Geofence you added. And a pending intent, and you will also need the Google API client to communicate with the Geofence API and the context, as we know. So in the constructor, you get to initialize those feeds that you could see right there, and you've done that. Now let's get to look at register or geofencing. To register the list of geofences specified in the Geofence list with the Google Play services, you need to connect to the Google Play services. You need to get the list of geofence to be triggered. You need to get the intent to launch the intent service when the geofence is triggered, and Geofence is going to be registered successfully with that. So you have to check if the Google API client is not null, and to actually get that set up. If it's null, it returns. It doesn't go further. But if it's not, a try and catch block will be run, and that's when you call the location services pointing at the geofencing API. You get the geofencing request and the geofence pending intent, whereby you set a result callback. So we're expecting a callback, we're expecting some data back, and you catch for a security exception. That should be a permission. So that's where you catch an exception generator if the app does not use the access find location permission, as I've said. Cool. That's cool for the registering or geofencing. Now, for any thing done, you should undo. That's the unregistered. So you could actually unregister geofences created by this app using the Google Play services as well, calling the location services geofencing API. Now you get geofencing pending intent, and you trigger the remove geofences, not add geofences as you have for register or geofence. That's just the only difference. Cool. Let's move further. Now you could also update the local array list of geofences using the data from the passed in list. This is where you use the place ID defined by the API as the geofence object ID. Now you have an object ID called the place ID, which you actually passed from the places API that you've actually extracted that particular place you're trying to add a geofence to. Now you're going to use a for each loop for each place and the place object, what you are actually getting from the place buffer. You have this update geofence list running from the main activity, which is actually going to give a place into the place buffer. So at this time, you're going to read the place information from the DB cursor. The place UID, you read the place latitude and longitude. You could actually get that as well. And what you're going to do, you're going to build a geofence object around the data you got. And you're going to set the request ID first. You're going to still get this request ID back, so don't forget that. You set the expiration duration, and you set the circular region, which is with the lat and long. So you'll be able to extract the lat and long based on the places from the place buffer, and you call the geofence radius that you're using. That's over 1,000 meters, and set transition types: transition enter and exit. That's the two geofences we have. You are either entering or you're exiting a geofence, and you add up that to the geofence object. Cool. We've actually set up that. Now I would like us to look at the pending intent object, which you'll be using to trigger the Geofence Transition intent service class. This is the service that will listen to any trigger. Either you are entering the geofence or you're exiting the geofence, and that's going to translate to a notification. So cool. That's where we actually lock on the Geofence Transition intent service. We are actually using a broadcast receiver later, but it's not that efficient. So you could actually take a dive into the transition intent service. That takes me down to the transition intent service. The placelist adapter, I will employ you to just look at that yourself. That's just binding to any recycler view using the unbind view order, the uncreate view order, and actually swap as you used to swap cursor. Now you're going to actually swap the places data. Now let's get to look at the Geofence Transition service very, very closely, and this is where I will employ you to be a little bit more attentive. This extends the intent service. Cool. And we're going to be using the Geodata client. This Geodata client is one of the latest implementation from the Google Places API. This actually translates an ID, just send an ID to this class, and this class is going to translate the ID into the latitude and longitude of that ID, the address of the ID, the title, and so on. A lot of metadata can be extracted out of an ID. So the geodata client is going to help us, since we are only passing ID around, so that we could be able to speed out the rename when we are having our notification. Cool. Let's move further. You need to override the unhandled intent, since it's an intent service that extends the intent services we all see, and this takes in an intent as a parameter. Cool. So it's going to be triggered with an intent. Now we're going to have a geofencing event, which will be from the intent, and we have a geofencing event object. So you have to test if there's an error with that. If there is, it should return, don't even process this data. But if it's not, you move further by getting the transition type. Is an entry and an exit. That's what you have here. So if the Geofence transition is equals to an enter on an exit, what are you going to do? You move further to do something. Firstly, you get the geofences that will trigger a single event, which can also trigger multiple geofences, as you all know. Now you add that as a list, so you could have more than one location within the same geofence. You understand what I'm trying to say? Which are just different locations, but they are just sharing a kind of same geofencing. So cool. You could get the transition details as a string over here. This is where we're going to use a helper method called the get Geofence Transition details, where we will pass in the transition and the triggering geofences. Let's get to look at the transition details before we get to look at much details of that method. Now this takes in the two parameters, as I said, the transition and the triggering geofences. So this gets the transition details and returns them as a string. Now that's the idea we're talking about. Now let's get to look at this. We're going to create a Geofence transition string as a string value. Now we get the transition string and you pass in the Geofence transition. Okay, so now let's get the IDs of each geofence that was triggered. Once you extract an ID, since we've set an ID right there, now we're not going to extract the same ID, which is just a place ID. Don't get it twisted. So this is how you're going to get it. You create an array list called the triggering geofences IDs list, or any name you feel like. Just to share the array list. Now you're going to loop through this list based on the geofence for each geofence in the triggering geofences list. That's just it. And what you're going to do, you're going to extract the get request ID. That's just it. That's the simplest ID you have it. So once you get that ID, you add it up to the list. We're actually using a list because you might have more than one geofencing trigger. So that's why it's actually a list. So you're going to add it up to the ID list as you've seen, which is an array list right there. So there's a string called the triggering geofences ID string. Now what's the string all about? Just call the text utilities to join up if it's more than one. Going to give a comma. Yes, and you have that as the ID list. So what you're going to return in, you're just returning that ID, that same ID you're iterating back, that same ID as a string, which you have right there, the triggering geofences ID string. So you now converted that to a string, which is from the ID list, just the ID, the placed ID. Don't get it twisted, as I've said again. So you are returning the place ID when you call the get Geofence Transition details, which you actually trigger from this point in time. So you have a Geofence Transition details as a string. Now how are we going to actually make this ID something readable to the user? Just speeding out an ID to a notification could be awkward, could mean nothing. The user won't know the particular places that he entered or he is exiting, or vice versa. So that's why we're going to be needing the geodata client. This geodata client is going to actually map an ID and extract the necessary parameters from it, and it's helpful using the places. It's from the Google Places API anyway. So you instantiate this class so that it's going to be usable, and you point at the get place by ID. Now you're extracting the place by its ID. So you pass in its ID, which is the Geofence Transition details. You go further to add the incomplete listener to this, and this time you instantiate the incomplete listener, passing the place buffer response as a generic class over there. Where you're going to override the method, since you instantiate it already, you need to override the incomplete method that takes in the place buffer response tags. Now you're going to test if the task is successful. That's cool, it was a success. You move further and get the results, which is the task get results, and pass that to the place buffer response object. You can see that. Cool. So now you have a places to extract values from, and you only do that by calling this index. That's the first index. And if you are actually sure that you could have more than one, you could actually use a for loop here to iterate through those, because if you are coming with a list of 5, so you have to iterate through so that it's going to actually spit out the right index I. So we could still even tweak more from here. Probably if you are having a bunch of notifications added, or you are entering the same geofence for maybe 3 locations you've added, so you could actually add more than one value here. And at this point in time, you need a character sequence. That's the value you have, that's the data type you need here, because once you are calling the place to get your name, that's to get the name of the place. You could get the name, you could get the address, you could get the lat, you could get the long, you could get some other metadata. Let's even get to see some metadata that you might actually get in my place. You could get an ID, you could get the address, you could get the name, you could get lat long, as you've seen, you could get the locale, you could get the phone number, you could get the price level, you get the rating, get the website URI, you could get some other values based on the place. Cool. And now you have the place name, you just convert that to string, since you are not using character sequence. You need a string value. So once you convert that to string, at the same time you need to release the places so that other calling APIs or calling functionality might use it. So you have to release it once you're through. Once you've actually converted, you've gotten what you needed, and now you have a place name ready as a string. So we have to go further to add some other juicy aspect to it. It will be very good to add a timestamp so that you could be sure the time that this gets triggered when you enter there and when you exit. That's the essence of the time. So you're actually going to pick the system time at that point in time that this it's been triggered. So that's why you call the current time get time in milliseconds, and you format that to a more readable format as you've seen here, so that could be read in days, months, year, and even the time. That's the date, and even the time in hour, minutes, and seconds. So you add that up as a string value, which you could see here. That's the place name and the formatted date. Now you add it up with the Geofence transition string. Is it entering or exit? That's the transition string. Is it entered or exit? Are you going out of the Geofence or entering? So the notification is going to be concrete enough and explicit to the user. Oh, I've entered the Oregon Plaza at so day and at so time. That's very cool. Oh, I've exited this Oregon Plaza at so day and at so time. Look at the time I'm exiting. So the user could actually get the application more engaging to use. So you're going to actually trigger that in the send notification, and this is actually going to take up the notification right there, which is what you have here. It takes the string because you actually form that as a string, which is the notification details. Now just the normal way you create your notification, you create an explicit intent to start the main activity or any activity that will be pushed or be called to take cognizance or to take use of these notification data. You construct a task stack that's to add to task stack builder. So, and you have the main activity to the task stack as well as the parent, which you have here. You push the content intent into the stack, which is the notification intent. You get a pending intent containing the entire back stack, and get the notification builder that's compatible with the platinum versions, and you define the notification settings by calling the builder to set a small icon based on the icon you're using. You could set the large icon. You could actually use different libraries to actually get this done, either Volley or so on. You set the color. The main point I want to point here is the title. Now you have the title as a notification detail, which is actually going to be they entered the location name and the date and time which was actually triggered, and the text which is actually going to be on top of that. Click notification to return to the app, and you send the pending intent. With that, you're cool, you're good to go. You've set up a robust form of notification. And if you should look at the transition string, as you've seen, is either entered, exit, or unknown transition. So it can't be more than these three parameters. It's either you enter, exit, or it's even unknown. Probably there's a problem somewhere. So with this now, you've been able to set up, and you get to see a more engaging notification, which is very, very good for what we're doing. And in the manifest, don't forget, you need to actually do some tweak. You might need to add you might need to add your API key here, and I will employ you to do that yourself. And at the same time, you're going to actually add the Geofence Transition intent service as a service used, and you will be adding specifying location and the permission internet. With that, you're good to go. You could actually launch your application and test it and see how it flows. I'll be uploading the source code to my GitHub link, and I will also be sharing that in the description of this video. And I'll implore you to lay hands on it, try to use it and test it. And you will need to register your application. You should know how to do that by now. How to register the SHA1, even if you're using debug or you're using the production that's for release. So but for practice, you just need to have a debug key. Once you have the debug key, take it to the Google API console, set up your account, or if you are new to that, start the first project, add up this, and just get the API key. You just need the API key, and at the same time, don't forget to enable the credential Google Places and the maps. These are very, very important because that's where the API is being used or called from. Cool. With that, I'll be saying thank you very, very much for hanging out with me throughout this video, and I'll implore you to click the subscribe button and also turn on your notification so you get first-hand information of anything happening right there in the channel. Once video is being uploaded, once our comments have been coming in, you'll be notified on the fly. Thank you one more time, and do have a blessed time. Bye bye for now.